Everyone, it's your boy Matt. This is Taco Admin for 23rd of February. Actually, no. Let's take a step back. It's not a Taco Admin. This is just a personal update. And this is a very informal one. Very informal. Very informal. So if I stumble over my words, remember, I'm just going for a fucking walk and I'm talking to my phone. There just happens to be several million people at the other end of it. But what can you do? So, values driven action. The modality of therapy that I tend to use is what's called acceptance and commitment therapy. It's what's considered in psychology a third wave therapy. So, the first wave is applied behavior analysis and the behavior therapies. So, those are the therapies that we use where we look at rewards and punishments and reward schedules. And all of the other therapeutic modalities, everything comes from applied behavior analysis. Everything. Like if you're a psychologist, you need to study applied behavior analysis. You need to know that. You need to be able to think in terms of conditioning and reinforcing cycles. And once I started doing that, the world just became a different thing. It is such a powerful way to view the world and people, right? So I want to promote ABA, not necessarily, uh, not necessarily as a modality for treatment all the time. Uh, I think ABA has a bad reputation because if you're at the receiving end of an ABA therapist and who isn't being respectful for your rights, it's a it's a terrible situation because ABA is all about having people around you provide rewards and punishments for your behavior. And if you're being treated poorly by the person in charge, if they have a sinister motive, and often that motive is sinister simply because they are being paid by a parent or a guardian, and that parent or guardian has their own little nuances, right? The person who is the therapist, if they're not careful, they're going to facilitate abuse by that parent or guardian onto that child or vulnerable person. And often, a lot of nasty things happen with applied behavior analysis simply because of who is paying who. I don't think ABA should ever be paid for privately. I think ABA needs to always be paid for uh, by the government, or even better, an NGO. I think what we should do, particularly with autism, is that, which is the modality which ABA is used for most frequently, it's usually used for autistic children, is it's one of those situations where it would be good to have a non-government organization which is run by autistic people for autistic people who provide applied behavior analysis. Uh, there's there's a large amount of resentment by a lot of autists against ABA, particularly because a lot of autistic people have been abused by ABA therapists. The other thing those people need to remember is that the people who are most interested in studying ABA are themselves autistic people. Right? It's a modality. All this stuff is for neurodivergence. The issue is that a large amount of people who end up in these fields, some of them, there's an internalized resentment about these about having a diagnosis of autism or something. My dad, for example, is so clearly autistic, but trying to explain that to him is very difficult because he comes from a generation where uh, being autistic was something to be ashamed of, while in reality it's just part of life, part of the population. Like, you go into an engineering faculty at a university, the entire discipline of engineering would crawl and to a halt if it wasn't for autistic people. Like, It starts with with environmental engineering. It's like barely autistic. Like some of those people are, like even some women get attracted to environmental engineering, just like so. But it starts just starting to screech in at civil. By mechanical, it's definitely there, and by electrical, oh my god! Like, bro, you need to bring some perfume into that classroom because it's gonna be stunk up by the autists who haven't put their fucking deodorant on. So there's that. Okay. The second wave is just cognitive behavior therapy. The cognitivists were people who were trying to look at the associations between thoughts. Um, so a thought, one definition of a thought is that it's a form of cognition that we're consciously aware of. I don't find cognitive stuff particularly interesting, but cognitive behavior therapy, a large amount of it is about trying to find the most rational thought for a situation, and they found that there were certain kinds of thoughts which cause people suffering, but there's some a priori problems with cognitive behavior therapy. A priori means fundamental underlying assumptions which are made, which aren't necessarily expressed. So with cognitive behavior therapy, it's a large amount of it is enforcing social norms on a person. So if you have a thought which is causing you suffering, a large amount of cognitive behavior therapists, and a lot of CBT therapists may dislike me saying this, and they'll correct around it because CBT techniques are very valid techniques, and every clinician needs to learn CBT, right? Everyone. You can't not learn CBT and call yourself a psych, or you can and say that you're a developing psych. But with cognitive behavior therapy, we have this issue where, like, say, if someone's suffering, they'll do tests like, okay, is this thought the most rational thought? Like, are you making out the idea to be worse than it is? Are you simulating an event which might never happen and causing yourself suffering which doesn't need to be there? There's all of these, but the most common, the most famous CBT technique is, trying to remember the name of the guy. It's taking, say, a thought to court. That's one phrase where you challenge the client about that thought, and you try and see if it's the most if it's irrational, and if that irrational thought is what's causing the suffering. Now, therapeutically, that's not a good technique to use with a large amount of different clients, because many people get quite attached to their thoughts. They become underlying beliefs for them, and while you might want to change that belief and then be able to improve that person's overall functioning, which is also a loaded term, but reduce their suffering, often what happens is that clients who are, say, have borderline personality disorder, they'll split. So there was a modality called dialectical behavior therapy, which is a third wave modality, which existed to find ways to work with clients who are more prone to that kind of sensitivity. And there was all of this, there's a lot of issues which occur there. Worse still, it doesn't bode well it doesn't work cross-culturally particularly well. CBT is very much a Western modality designed for Western people, and a lot of the assumptions, and there is a lot of a priori assumptions in CBT which I find quite problematic if it's used in a way which is not skilled. Okay, so again, ABA and CBT are very good groups of techniques. It's the context and how they are used. So the clinicians should have like a big toolkit that they draw from, and they should have all the tools that they need. It's just that they need to be careful when they use those tools, because if they use them inappropriately, they're going to cause a lot of suffering. So finally, there's the third wave therapies. And third wave therapies have a a different, have an extra thing tacked onto it. So first of all, first wave therapies, applied behavior analysis. We're looking at cycles of reward, punishment, and frequencies across time, and that's how we see behaviors increasing or decreasing. Then we had cognitive behavior therapy. They added cognition to it, which is the patterns of thoughts. ABA, like radical behaviorists, will just say cognition is an unnecessary way of splitting the variance. It's all behavior all the way down, brother. It's all reinforcement. You've just found a different way of conceptualizing it, and it's a useful way, but it's still the same bloody thing. That's what I would say. I'd love to hear a cognitivist response to that. Not because I'm looking for a fight, I'm actually looking to expand my knowledge. As a therapist, I'm very good at what I do. I'm very good at what I do because I have all this training of things associated with it. And there's going to be people who know a lot about CBT, and I'd very much like to learn from them. And then finally, we have the third wave therapies. Now, third wave therapies, the two most famous ones are acceptance and commitment therapy and dialectical behavior therapy. They're the same bloody thing. It's just I see DBT as one presentation of ACT, a very, very useful presentation, and I think actually one which every clinician should learn. I think so. The addition there is this concept of cognitive diffusion, and it's the idea that there's a separation between ourselves and our emotions. There was a concept in a linguistic concept called relational frame theory, and I would want to sit down and reread on that before I presented specific information on it. However, the big thing with this is this idea is that there's this concept of the self as context, right? So imagine that we have a chessboard. I make a move, then there's another move, and there's another, and then the other player makes a move. And what happens to us when we start taking our thoughts to court, constantly trying to fight our cognition, is that we end up in a situation where I make a move, then the other part of me, which is judging me and trying to figure out what's rational or irrational, it's going to make another move. Rational or irrational isn't even the correct term. Like, you know, what if you're arguing inside your head and you are not a particularly rational person? Like, it just creates a lot of frustration, it creates anxiety, and this cycle continues. So what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to separate yourself from your cognition. And the concepts of acceptance and commitment therapy and dialectical behavior therapy is that we teach people how to separate themselves from their cognition, as well as working with, and then also using the behavioral stuff and some of the cognitive stuff. Now, acceptance and commitment therapists, we're famous for using a lot of metaphors. It's a lot of fun. It's like going to, you know, it's great stuff. I highly recommend seeing an acceptance and commitment therapist if you're struggling with something, or even if you're interested in having a more fulfilling life, because it's what is classified as a positive form of psychology. Positive psychology is the field of psychology which deals with how do we improve life experience and get more joy and more things from life. So it doesn't just deal with how do we deal with our suffering, but how do we have things to do when we're not suffering, which is good. Okay, and that's an excellent way of going about things, because otherwise we end up in a situation where our mental illness becomes a full-time job, right? Just managing it. And we don't want that. We want to be able to have a rich and fulfilling life. Hence why positive psychology and ACT for the general population is usually what I recommend. The DBT uses a skills approach, where you'll teach a client a skill, and the idea is that as they become more skilled, they're able to have a more fulfilling life. And that's using that skill approach is also useful because instead of blaming the person for their thoughts and cognition as an unskilled CBT clinician would. So remember, I'm using the term unskilled because CBT is a very valid modality, and many of the best clinicians are CBT clinicians. But there is still this problem. So if you say, okay, buddy, it's not that there's not something wrong with you. It's not you. It's just that there's this skill you haven't learned yet. And once you learn that skill, life will be better for you. So that's a breakdown of these things. When we're looking at acceptance and commitment therapy, when we're trying to orientate a person, because ACT takes the perspective that there is no, it doesn't have those same a priori assumptions that cognitive behavior therapy has. So if you see a good ACT clinician, it translates better cross-culturally, okay? And this is the other reason why ACT is a better modality, in my opinion, because it does translate cross-culturally, and in a multicultural society, that's important. And the way it does that is that it uses something called values-driven action. This is an essential component to it. You'll have modules that we go through. A clinician has learning outcomes. So the same way that you go to you may go to your class and you might do year 10 maths or year 12 history or something like that. Your teacher will have a list of learning outcomes, and they'll have a curriculum. And if they don't get through that full curriculum, then they haven't taught you that year's worth of history or maths. When you go to see your ACT therapist, if they're any good, like they will have had, and this is something where I do need to express and do cross blades with other therapists, because many therapists do not take this approach, and when they do not take this approach, they're actually wasting their clients' time, and they're using government money if it's subsidized in a way which is not ethical. But when you go and see your ACT therapist, they're meant to bring you through these modules to increase your ability. And if they're not doing that, then they're not really providing acceptance and commitment therapy. They're providing a generic counseling service, and you're paying for a high-class escort, and they're providing a talk service, and they're not providing psychology. Yep, said it. So one of the modules of acceptance and commitment therapy is values-driven action. And the idea is that we work with the client to figure out what they value in the world, what they want to see more of with them and their relationship in it, what they want more for themselves. And we usually get a list of words, usually less than 10. I think 5 is about as much as most people can remember and keep in their pocket all the time, because you need to keep these values in your pocket, okay? There needs to be something which is always with you. They don't want to, it's not something which wants to wear you down. It's not meant to be like a diver's belt where you have the lead weights stuck around your waist and it's constantly weighing you down and stopping you from doing anything. It doesn't want to be like that. It's a series of things that you keep in your pocket, okay? And this is a metaphor. And when you have a decision you want to make, when you're looking at what you want to have more of in the world, you then refer back to your values. So a big part of acceptance and commitment therapy is figuring out and defining these values, and that's how we get decisions, and that's how we orientate a person in acceptance and commitment therapy and it removes those cultural problems that we have in cognitive behavior therapy, where it has this limited cross-cultural ability, because and there's all those a priori assumptions in cognitive behavior therapy about what is suffering. And that's also brings me to my final point, which I want to make today during my off-the-cuff rant while providing this education service is with these things, there is a fundamental limitation to our health and medical system. Okay, when we say health, particularly with mental illness and these things, because mental illness is just whatever is stopping a person from engaging in society, right, in a way which society defines as productive. We need to have these, because we've decided to have something called mental illness, we now have a box, and then in that box we chuck all the things and people, concepts and ideas which society thinks aren't very good. And once a person or something's chucked in that box, then that means that that is unhealthy or bad, and there's all the things associated with that. Back in the good old days, we'd just say they were demon possessed or some shit, right? And we'd have our witch doctors do their funky magic. Being the equivalent of a psychologist 800 years ago was a lot more fun than it is today. But getting back to the thing, right? I've cast out demons before. Don't worry, that was a funny story. That's a story where we had a housemate who died, and we had this strange multicultural ceremony in my house because we were worried that I had housemates who believed that there was a demon possession. I'm an atheist, but to them it was very real, and we did go through a ceremony and it helped everyone out. So, like, cross-cultural stuff is a thing. People do have legitimate experiences of demon possession and these things. And while I don't think there are demons, those experiences are experiences those people are having, and their well-being is adversely affected by it. And there's a place for these cultural practices such as exorcisms and those kinds of things. But returning to the point, by having this values-driven action part of ACT, we're able to navigate around it, and it's a very important module. It's usually one of the first modules I do. When I do ACT, what I tend to do is every session I do a cognitive diffusion exercise where I teach some form of meditation, or something which helps someone separate themselves from cognition, and it has to be every session, otherwise the person won't master the ability for a way for it to be useful at a time of stress. And then I would, but one of the early sessions I usually do is the values-driven action one, because it helps us with so many different problems later on, and it stacks on top of the other modules. Sorry, the other modules stack on top of it. So that's the rant for today. I've got some. Oh yeah, I need to add some things on top of that. So personally, I was talking about those two bins before. My sister, while trying to take control of my life, chucked me. We're talking about the bins of what is mental illness and behaviors which we say are not adaptive for society, and what is healthy behavior. My sister, when I stopped functioning around 2 years ago, because I'd just been in fight or flight for around 2 years and I just couldn't fucking keep going, and I just kind of collapsed. Now, she tried to make me mentally unwell. She tried to make me mentally ill. She took me to a mental health hospital, and at this time I trusted her, and now I know never to do that. You don't ever want to have anyone put you in that bin, right? Because what ended up happening is that I got there, and I then had this series of horrific experiences where people were trying to manufacture a narrative, trying to put me in that bin, like with all these a priori assumptions, which they were not aware of, because none of the people in that hospital were skilled. It was horrifying. It was horrifying. I think the worst part of it was that I had this nurse who was very muscular, and him and I had a conflict, so he falsified a drug toxicology report. I think he contaminated a urine sample, and he was the one who did that. I don't even think he put any actual drugs in it. I think he just like put some fucking vitamins or some shit. And it was the weirdest experience to have had. And I had this fucking psychiatrist who was just constantly misinterpreting everything I said. So, for example, such that it was put into that bin. And the difference in skill level between myself and the clinicians in that place was massive. It was massive. And there is a significant requirement to understand the a priori assumptions in our culture and mental health. So, number one thing I want people to take away from this is what mental health is. Mental health is the bin that we put people in, and ideas, things that when we say that is not adaptive to functioning in our society, right? But what is society? What do we want society to be? All these things, they're all political, value-laden questions, and it's all ends up all being ideological. And what people think people should or should not be like. It becomes very moralistic, okay? And that's the main thing I wanted to express today. I also need to express, secondly, that anytime there's any documentation about me, it's often edited. I might apply for a job and things in my application for the job will be adjusted so I will go there or not go there because I've had to deal with the Australian Signals Directorate and been a part of the spooky community. And finally, I wanted to express that if you're seeing a psychologist, and this is something I need to express to other psychologists, you need to go through your modules and you can't half-ass it and just act as a counselor, okay? When the government is subsidizing your fucking therapy, or you claim to be providing a standard of therapy as a health intervention at the psychologist level, if you're not going through the modules, then you're not doing it. You're just having government funded prostitution, and it's ridiculous. And that's the biggest reason why we have often have very mediocre outcomes with psychology. And there's always this marketing thing, like the psychology organizations have done so much for themselves to make it all prestigious and shit, and make going to see a psychologist so healthy and so good for you, and it's so in vogue to go see a therapist. And it's created this situation where there's this demand for a service and the quality of the service is often very low. Part of that's because therapists get far too much autonomy, and I think we need to monitor the quality of the therapy which is being provided a shit ton better, so that we act. And once you start monitoring it like that, you actually don't need psychologists providing people trained at the psychologist level to provide the therapy. You can have a person who has done a 6-month TAFE course in counselling, go into the Next Steps program and then providing cognitive behavior therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy. You don't need highly trained people providing these therapies a lot of the time. You just need those people to be providing the therapies in accordance with the module. Most school teachers can provide therapy and would provide therapy at a higher level than many psychologists do presently, because they're used to going through learning outcomes. I was attracted to psychology as a profession because I needed something which was this cushy-ish job which I could do when my body started breaking down as I got older. That's what attracted me to it. It's actually, there's a lot of skill involved in it, which you develop, but most of the training I have really allows me to do assessment, and that assessment's the only reason why you need psychologists in the development of these modalities. In a system which made sense, psychologists would be the people who were auditing counselors, people who do like a fucking TAFE course and then provide the therapy. And we would be able to provide a level of mental health service to the community which is far higher than what we're providing at the moment, far cheaper, and provide more value than what's being provided by psychologists who are charging the earth. And there's also an issue in Australia where we have an artificially designed skill shortage in psychology and counselling, which is intended to allow psychologists and these people to charge more. And it all comes down to prestige in the discipline, people thinking they're very special, shitheads like Peter Henry who think of themselves too highly, and stuff like this. There's nothing magical about therapy. If you do if the person is applying the modules after you two have developed an effective cooperative relationship, such as it is in any teaching relationship, they get better outcomes, right? And you don't need to be as educated as I am to be providing. The only reason why we have that is to create prestige in the discipline, so that we psychologists maintain control and a monopoly on talk therapy. That's what's happening, and it's not in the interests of the Australian people or the taxpayer. It's just pretentious crap, and you've seen this pretentious crap and the pretentious bullshit culture of psychology play out publicly between the spat between Stephen, Peter Henry, and myself, right? It's just pretentious upper class bullshit, and that's the kind of mold that I'm trying to break psychology as a discipline out of, and I'll be consider my career very successful if I achieve that. Out of the way, everyone. Have a great day. Rant over.